Juan, The Story of a Filipino Boy by Helen P. Beatty, Highland, San Bernardino County, California. I should like to tell something of a Filipino boy, Juan, who spent 5 years in our family in our home in Southern California, as we had him with us long enough to study him and to develop some ideas regarding Filipino character. He was a Visayan from Negros, well beyond his teens evidently, with Chinese blood clearly apparent. This was all encouraging to us. The Visayans are an amiable, though not so clever people as the Tagalogs about Manila, and the Chinese ancestor, perhaps a grandfather, had probably left some of his stability to the flighty Malay stock. My heart sank when I realized that he was utterly untrained for house service, and that I should have to teach him everything from very bedrock up. He had never eaten from a knife or a fork, had never slept in a bed with sheets and pillows, knew nothing of American standards of cleanliness and sanitation. But he was willing, and we went with it. I overlooked much, closed my eyes too much, and gradually, through with anguish, probably on the part of both of us, Juan learned to do things acceptably. In time, he became an excellent cook.
Emmanuel Tardes, February 18, 1937. I was born in Manila in 1905, the oldest son in a family of 6, 4 older boys and 2 girls. When I was 10 years old, my mother died of fever, and on that day I stopped being a child and became a man. My father was a laborer and earned very little money. It was hard in those days to make ends meet. When I was 20, I joined the United States Coast Guard as a mess boy and was assigned in the USS Ute, which was patrolling the Philippine waters at the time. My enlistment in the Coast Guard opened up a new world for me. I spent a year and a half on the Ute and then transferred to the Seminole, which needed a second cook. My father had managed to get a job with the street railway company in Manila and had been advanced to motorman before I left. This was indeed a joy to his heart. He took childish delight in running the car, and I believe that he hated to go to bed for fear that something would happen to his beloved trolley. I came out of the service a full-fledged American citizen. Serving in the branch of service with an honorable discharge automatically makes you one, and with over $800 in my pocket. I headed for Hollywood, where I hoped to see some of my screen favorites. I went to an employment agency and was sent out on a job as a cook that happened to be the home of John Gilbert, the movie star. Mr. Gilbert's butler hired me after I had demonstrated my ability as a cook by preparing him some corned beef and cabbage. He was Irish, and that was his favorite dish, and many times I had thanked God that my commander on the Ute was also Irish, and that corned beef and cabbage was his favorite dish. Life is pretty slick for me. I have nothing to worry about, and I have quite a bit of money in the bank. I don't even have to wash the dirty dishes. We have a punk as a helper for that. I don't ever want to go to the Philippines again. My family is still there and doing well, and I will see them someday. They all want to come to America, except my father, who is still in love with a streetcar in Manila. I'm afraid to send him a picture of one of the really big ones here in Los Angeles. It would break his heart. He thinks that the dinky he runs in Manila is about the finest thing in the world.
My name is Gerald Gubaton. I am a senior planner with the Community Redevelopment Agency of the City of Los Angeles, which is the very same agency that was responsible for demolishing Bunker Hill and displacing all the people who lived there, including the Filipino community. And it took me a long time before I realized, perhaps, that I entered into this field of urban planning perhaps because of the experiences of my own father and his generation. When I grew up in this neighborhood and visited my uncle, Eddie, getting those haircuts from Papa Joe at the old house up here, those memories are embedded in me. This whole reflection upon what is historic Filipino town, to me, has also reinforced the idea of why I got into this field, which is to think about and try to influence the decisions that impact how a neighborhood is created. And the notion of engagement, civic engagement, or that you and I should be empowered to engage and participate and assert ourselves politically. The decision makers are over there in City Hall, over there, but they're perhaps making decisions based on their perception of the world, their worldview. Is their worldview reflective of the community and the people who actually live in these neighborhoods, or are they imposing their own agenda? So this profession of urban planning, I suppose, is a profession that is not just technocratic, because I have to know about zoning and real estate and finance, but it's also about formulating policy, public policy that impacts the lives of people.
I first moved into historic Filipino town in 1941 when I was 1 year old. My father's name was Bonavir. He was from Swedish blood. Sabrino is my mother's name. She's Filipino and Spanish. When she was in her 20s, she came to America. My sister was born in the Philippines, in Baguio. I was conceived in Baguio. 2 weeks after the boat docked, my father died. And 2 weeks after that, I was born. We lived on Bunker Hill before we moved into the area now called Historic Filipino Town. We had stayed with my Swedish auntie for a year, and my mother, who was Filipino and Catholic, did not get along with my auntie, who was very Swedish and Lutheran. After a year of what my mother describes as slavery, she asked to get my father's insurance money so we could move somewhere. And my auntie said, no, we had used that money up for room and board. So she took us downtown LA, probably pretty close to Bunker Hill, down at the bottom, was that 3rd Street, and dropped us off at the corner there with $5 and said goodbye. That was our introduction to Filipino town. There were a lot of Filipinos there, and I guess that was the good thing that my auntie did. She knew where the Filipinos were. There were also some very, very poor white people there. I imagine they blew in with the dust, from the Dust Bowl, from Oklahoma in that area. We lived in a boarding house. We had one room. I remember the buildings because they had stairs on the outside of the building. And you'd go up and down the stairs. And then we had stairs going up the Angel's Flight. So we would go up those stairs, and my mother would hold me really close and say, don't go near the darkness, you'll be shanghaied. That always stayed with me, I didn't know what it was. I kind of wanted to see, maybe I should be shanghaied and find out what that was. But it sounded very scary. The Angel's Flight was so much fun because the one car would be coming down and the other one coming up, and they look like they're going to hit each other, and then just at the last second they go like that around each other. Oh, my sister and I thought that was very exciting. But we didn't usually have enough money for Angel's Flight, so we usually went up the stairs. So when you lose your father, you lose your mother. It goes to work. My mother was working at Pacific Enameling and Plating Company downtown LA for 18 cents an hour, year after year after year, and came home after long days and just hoped I hadn't been bad. And I had been, of course.
My name is Philip Veracruz. I was born on Christmas Day, 1904, in a small barrio called Sawang. When my mother asked me how long I plan to stay away, I told her 3 years. Well, I've been here in the US over 50 years now, and I haven't back yet. That's the way it was been for most of us Filipino old-timers. All the stories we heard were only success stories. So my plan was to finish college in America, get a job over there, send my money, and then return home and support my family. It was only after I finally got to America that I understood how different reality was for us Filipinos. Philip Veracruz, A Personal History of Filipino Immigrants and the Farm Workers Movement by Craig Charlin and Lilia B. Villanueva. Today I'm going to talk about the camps. The camps were on private property, isolated from main highways and cities. The living conditions were crude. The rooms were extremely small, with cracked walls topped with newspaper. The shower stalls, toilets, and cooking facilities open to the outside element. The hallways too narrow for two people to pass. A Filipino old-timer who lived in one of these camps told us that the living condition in his camps were basically the same as they were 50 years ago when he first boat from the Philippines and full of high hopes. What makes this Filipino situation most ironic is that they left their home countries in search of better opportunities, and half a century later their living conditions in the United States are not much better than those of tenant farm workers living today in the Philippines, a third world country.
All right, there was a very funny, very odd shop down at the corner of, out in front, they had a man, it wasn't really a man, they had a whole diving outfit with, you know, the kind of helmeted diving thing that you had to screw onto the person, and there was a great big plate in front of his face. And that guy stood on that corner for years. The whole time I was growing up, he was there on the corner. The streetcar ran here, up and down, and if we were flush with Mom would take my sister and me on the streetcar ride to what she called the end of the Caroline. Do you know what that was? It's the end of the car line, end of the streetcar line. And so we would go down there to that corner, and I would look at this guy for a long time while we were waiting for the streetcar to come. And if we really had a lot of money, we went to the Log Cabin restaurant, which was right on the other corner, for pancakes and bacon. And then we'd get on the streetcar and ride to the end of the Caroline, around and come back. And we often met people. My mother was very friendly, and so was I. And we would meet lots of people on the streetcar, and sometimes she would bring them home and cook for them. And sometimes it would be young boys who were, this is during war. She would bring home some young boys and cook for them, and they were so happy to be in a house. Of course, if there were any Pinoys anywhere, she brought them home immediately. And they were all also very happy to be at home, because most of them were bachelors here without families, not allowed to marry, and they were also be very happy to be at home, even though our house is very humble.
My name is Jamie Ratcliffe Liquanan. My age is 82 years old. I've been here for 50 years. Filipino town, they call it now. In the 50s, this area of Temple Street, the Filipinos controlled this whole area from Figueroa all the way to Hoover Street. All of those stores were all rented or were owned by Filipino entrepreneurs. Most of them were veterans. And they had gotten their capital from the Veterans Administration. Some of them will come out and talk about getting 6, 7 people together and putting their monies together and open up a restaurant, but not here, but towards Figueroa, where the accumulation of Filipinos, the concentration of Filipinos that come from around the area would meet in there, meet their friends, and they would eat at the restaurant called Morong. Then there would be a bar across the street called the Black Bear, was owned by a Filipino, and there was a pool hall, which was owned by Villaflor. You see this apartment house in here called 300 Parkview Apartments. They were fully occupied by the residents were all Filipinos. And they had like a sort of a boarding house. And those would be the Filipinos that came in here just right after the war, or were residents in here before the war and went into the army. And when they got out of the service during World War II, all the first-class restaurants in Los Angeles, all the chefs were Filipinos, especially the Van de Kamp chain. The barber shop was on the other side where Antonio Balbuena's building, and still standing next to the El Recuerdo market. Used to be Filipino market. Filipinos would come in here and they would go to the coffee shops, small coffee shops or sari-sari store that they used to call it, and eat Filipino food. But it was just a small kitchen in the back, and they would just cook